Hey guys, it's Miss Miklos, and I just wanted to make this quick video to give you some intro graphing calculator tips and tricks that I think will be helpful for you to know for the future. So the first thing I want to talk about is dealing with fractions. This is by far the biggest question you guys have for me during quizzes, so I thought that it would be helpful to review it. So I'm going to start with just a really basic fraction problem if I was adding 3/4 plus 1/6. So if I just wanted to use my calculator instead of finding a common denominator and dealing with all of that, what I would do, I need to use parentheses around the fraction. I'm going to use the division sign to represent the fraction bar. So I would do parenthesis 3 divided by 4 parenthesis plus parenthesis 1 divided by 6 parenthesis. If I have a bigger fraction, I would need to put parentheses around the whole numerator or the whole denominator just to tell my calculator to follow order of operations. Once I press enter, I end up getting this long decimal as my answer. And as you guys know, this would not be an acceptable answer on a quiz or a test because this is not an exact fraction. So what I'm going to do, exact decimal I mean. What I'm going to do is actually convert this into a fraction. So the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to press the math button on my calculator, and this menu comes up. And I'm going to choose number 1, which says math frac. As soon as I press enter, it'll say answer and then arrow frac, and I'll press enter again, and it automatically changes this decimal into the corresponding fraction, and it reduces it for you. I think in Honors Algebra 2, this is probably one of the most important things for you to know on how to use your calculator because it makes your life with fractions a lot easier. The next thing I want to highlight is how to use an answer in the calculator. And what I mean by that is, let's pretend that we dealt with this fraction, 3/5 minus 7/12. So I put that into my calculator and it gives me a decimal. Now let's say that I wanted to actually find the square root of that. And if I press square root right now, which by the way is second x squared, that's what gives me the square root. It's kind of a pain to type this whole decimal back in. So I can press second square root, and if I press second negative, that will give me whatever my previous answer was. So this is something we use a lot when I don't want to have to deal with retyping this big long mess. So this would be our correct answer. Now, if you tried to change this into into a fraction, we could press math and then do frac again. And this is kind of applying what we learned back in chapter 1. If this does not convert into a fraction, that means it is irrational, because we learned irrational numbers cannot be written as a fraction of integers. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm using my calculator, I rush and I make mistakes. So, the problem that I want to go through here is I brought up that 3/5 minus 7/12 again, and I got that answer. And then what if I looked on my homework and I realized, shoot, I was actually supposed to do 3 divided by 6 instead of 3 divided by 5. What we can use is the button, which is second enter, and it gives me my previous entry. So whatever my previous entry was will show up. Now, you can kind of see it here, but right on the 5, there's kind of like a cursor and it's blinking. And I can use my left and right arrow, and I can move it on top of what I want to change, and then just type over it. So in this case, I wanted to change the 5, so I just typed over it and made it a 6 instead. If for some reason I wanted to delete something altogether, like let's say it was just supposed to be 3 instead of 3 divided by 5, I could go on top of the number and press delete. Or let's say I wanted to insert something, like this should have been 3 divided by 25. If I want to insert something, I would press second delete, and that gives me insert, and it will allow you to type things in without overwriting what you already have in your calculator screen. So that covers a lot of the basic calculator stuff. that we can just use on an everyday basis. Now I want to talk about graphing. We did hit on this really briefly, and we went through it in class, and some of you had your graphing calculators and some of you didn't. So I figured this would be a good help for you just to practice. So let's say I have y equals 3x minus 5. We obviously know how to graph that by hand, but if I wanted to graph it into my graphing calculator, I'm going to start by pressing the y equals button. Whenever we're graphing, these 5 buttons are the ones that we are going to be referring to. So I'm going to press y equals, and this screen will show up. Now, I already typed in 3x minus 5, but the way that I went around doing that, I pressed 3. Whenever I want to put x in, I use this button right here. It is x t theta n. We use that all the time. Minus 5. Notice I use the subtraction symbol, not the negative symbol. Once I get to this point, I'm going to press the zoom button, and there's going to be a screen that has all these options, and I'm going to choose zoom 6. And what zoom 6 does, it gives us a standard graph, which means 10 x values on each side, 10 y values on each side. If you guys just press graph, your calculator will automatically graph whatever the previous window you have it set in your calculator. So for a lot of you, if we haven't graphed much yet, it probably will show up 10 by 10. But if you've manipulated the window or zoomed in or out, which we're going to talk about in a moment, pressing zoom 6 will always give me a 10 by 10 graph. So this is just a snapshot of what this picture looks like. Now we know it does continue to the right and to the left. We're just seeing a little picture of it. So let's say I wanted to zoom in, and we haven't really seen a reason why I would want to zoom in yet, but we will get to that in Honors Algebra 2 later on, and you will especially see this in pre-calculus. So if I'm pressing zoom, okay, so zoom once again is this middle button right here. This is the zoom menu that I was talking about previously, where we chose zoom 6 before. If I want to zoom in or zoom out, I'm going to choose 2 for in, 3 for out. And quite honestly, 2, 3, and 6 are really the only ones I use off the zoom menu. But in this case, I want to zoom in. So I'm going to choose option 2. And it's going to look like this, where I have a cursor. And right now my cursor is right there, and it tells me it's at 0, 0. I can move the cursor using my arrows to wherever I want to go. As soon as I get where I want to go, I'm going to press enter. And all of a sudden it will zoom in, and this is our new zoomed in picture. If I wanted to zoom in again, I could repeat the process. If I wanted to get back to my 10 by 10 graph, I could do zoom 6. And if I wanted to zoom out, I would use a similar method to this and use option number 3. The window is another way that we can change the way our graph looks like. So window is this button right here, and if you press window right now, if you have been following on your calculator what I've been doing, this is what my window looks like. And your numbers might look a little bit different depending on where you zoomed, but when I zoomed in, this is what it gave me. Now let's say I wanted to manipulate the way my graph looks. The 4 things I care about are x-min, x-max. I know this is controlling the domain, so that's controlling left and right. The y-min and y-max are controlling up and down. So I can go in and clear whatever this is. So I cleared this, and I said I wanted my x minimum to be 0. That means I don't care about anything that's to the left here. I only made my x max 6, so we can see that 6 goes right here. I decided I only care about positive y values, so I made my y min 0 and my y max 12. At this point, I can just press the graph button, and this is what the picture looks like. Now, I can change the window to be whatever I want. I can make it really big. I can make it small. I can make it so it focuses on just one of the quadrants. It really doesn't matter. It gives me a lot of options to view my graph. The table is a really cool feature that I think not many people know about. So before we actually press the table button, which is second graph, I'm going to press the table setup button, which is second window. So if you press second window, you'll get a screen that looks like this. And just to explain what this means, okay, this first value is telling me the x value that my window is going to start at, or that my table is going to start at. So right now I have it set to be some weird decimal. We said delta means change, so change in the table. Right now I have it set so it's changing every 1,000. Let's say I didn't like these values. I'm going to just delete them and go over them. So let's say I want my table to start at 0 and I want it to change every 1 value. So I went ahead and inputted those. Now I can press second graph, and this is what the table will look like. The reason that this is nice, this gives me my x values and my y values, and I can move the arrow up and down, and it'll show me for each specific input what the output is. So in this particular function I've graphed, my input was 4, my output is 7. My input was 6, my output was 13. If you cared about going by 2s or 0.5, then I would go back to the table setup and change those values. And if I wanted to find something, like let's say I didn't care about these x values, if I cared about like 100, it might take me a while to scroll all the way down using the down arrow. So that's when I would change this table start button to be 100, and then it would tell me right away, when x is 100, what is the y value? The very final thing I want to talk about is how we graph a piecewise function. So this is what we talked about in class we talked about that in class this week. So the way that I graph a piecewise function, it is f of x equals, okay, and here are my two different pieces. This is telling us, remember, f of x equals 3x plus 1 when x is greater than or equal to 1. F of x equals x minus 1 when x is less than 1. So if I'm looking at this, what I'm going to have to do here, I'm going to press y equals. In the first set of parentheses, I'm going to put function 1, which I called f sub 1 here. So function 1, in this case, was 3x plus 1. In the second set of parentheses, I'm putting domain 1. So x is greater than or equal to 1. And I don't have a picture of this on here, but the way that we get to all of these different inequality symbols is if I press second math. If you press second math, these are some of the options that it gives you. So I can just scroll up and down and press enter on whatever I want. So I did x is greater than or equal to 1. Okay, then I'm going to have to press the plus sign, put in the second function in parentheses, so I typed in x minus 1, and put this second domain in parentheses, which was x is less than 1. This is the picture of what the graph looks like. Now, some cool things we can do with this. We can go ahead and use the table, like I just showed you, or the other thing we can do is use trace. I personally like using trace a lot. If you press trace, what's going to happen is going to show me what my function is. So that's my whole function typed out. And it's going to give me an x value and a y value. I can use the left and right arrows, and it's going to scroll along this function and give me different ordered pairs that are solutions. Now, the one thing that's really cool that it does is since x is the domain, that's the independent variable, I can choose whatever I want. So in this case, I cared what is the what is the y value when x is equal to 3. So I typed 3 into my calculator and pressed enter, and y equals 10 is what showed up. If I cared about the y value when x is equal to 6, I would type in 6 and press enter, and it would give me the y value. So hopefully this is helpful. It's just giving you a brief intro to graphing. If you guys ever want to come in during help hours, I'm happy to help you guys out one-on-one with the calculator.